Welcome back. We'll begin this module with an introduction to divine law in Islam, the Sharia. As the reading explained, the term Sharia comes from the Arabic root road. The word Shara means an avenue in contemporary Arabic, and therefore really it means the big road to God. It's interesting that both the law of Islam and the spiritual path in Islam have the symbolism of road connected to them, because the spiritual path is called tariqah, which means a path or small road, which we'll discuss later in this module. For Western students, it's very difficult to understand the significance of the Sharia. So before speaking about what the content of the Sharia is and how it was formulated, I must say something about two very differing points of view concerning divine law that exist between the Islamic world and the West. On this particular issue, Judaism in the West is very, very close to the Islamic perspective. Any traditional Jew who still follows Jewish law, the law of halakha, understands perfectly what the Sharia is. The problem is for the vast majority of Westerners who are either Christians or come from a Christian background. The problem is the following. Christianity did not bring a law for society from the bosom of the Christian revelation. That is, the Christian revelation was a spiritual law, and when Christianity spread into the Western world, starting from the South, of course, it adopted Roman law, and much of it was integrated into Christianity, to the extent that the structure of the Catholic Church, of the bishoprics and episcopates and so forth, was based actually on the administrative division of the Roman Empire, and the laws that pertained to it were Christianized. They were not part and parcel of the sayings of Christ. There's nothing in the New Testament about cardinals and bishops and archbishops and rule over the church. And that's why to this day, Latin is so important in Western law. Then a second source came later on when Northern Europe became Christian, and Germanic law and common law became a source of legal knowledge and legal practice for Christians. And so you began to get a situation in which you had laws in society that were impregnated with the values of Christianity, but which did not originate from the Christian revelation. And the idea has always existed in the West that laws are for human convenience. The immutable laws are the moral laws, although now people are even trying to flaunt those, but not the laws about taxation or something like that. And so the Western mind, even when it was completely Christian, distinguished between moral laws, which it considered to be laws given by God, and laws of society, which are made for human beings for their own needs, convenience, necessity, and so forth, on the basis of those moral laws. For example, taxation. All taxation in the West is based on convenience or on older habits, including common law. You tax the well in Ireland just as it was taxed all the time as far as the water was concerned. You don't know how far back. And taxation for roads, let's say, in Italy, that kind of thing. Whereas in Islam, this element is supposed to be under the divine law. I say supposed to be because on this particular issue, other taxes outside of the Sharia have been sometimes promulgated in the Islamic world as well. Anyway, according to Islam, God is the lawgiver, not even the prophet. One of the names of God is the Shara, the lawgiver, which even those of you who don't know Arabic can guess is related to the word Sharia. Shara is an active noun, he who gives the law. So God is the lawgiver, not the legislature. Perhaps the greatest tension within the Islamic world and between the West and the Islamic world is ultimately on this question. Who is the lawgiver, and what is the origin of laws? According to Islam, the Sharia, the divine law, is the concrete embodiment of the will of God for Muslims. I want to repeat that because every word in that sentence is important. The Sharia is the concrete embodiment of the will of God for Muslims. Why do I say concrete embodiment? Because, for example, Christ said that you must be charitable, You must be good. That's the general principle. But how am I to be charitable? That was not specified by Christ himself. He set the supreme example of the great saint, but the concrete embodiment of this virtue was gradually worked out by the church. And since it was worked out gradually by the church, many later generations said, "Ah, this is not the saying of Christ. This is an 11th century Christian practice." 11th century Italy is no better than 21st century Washington, which is of course a very, very big question mark. But nevertheless, I can do whatever I want. I'm not going to pay attention to what 11th century Italy did. In Islam, this is not at all the case. Not only is there a principle that you must be good or you must be charitable, but there are concrete laws as to how. You must be kind to the neighbor, for example. That's the general Christian principle. Christ said, "Deal with thy neighbor as thyself." But in Islam, it's not only a general principle, but there are actual concrete laws. For example, you cannot make more noise than a certain amount, not to disturb the neighbor. If water is flowing from the house of the neighbor to your house, let's say when you would have streams, the neighbor up there does not have the right to pollute the water before it gets down to you, and so forth and so on. There are all kinds of very complicated laws that explain in a concrete fashion what the principle is of kindness towards the neighbor. So just as one cannot be a serious Christian without believing in the salvific power of Christ, so one cannot be a serious Muslim without accepting the reality of the Sharia. Now here it is important to distinguish between the Sharia and fiqh. Law taken directly from the Quran and Hadith is referred to as the Sharia, whereas the word fiqh describes derived law, that which comes from an integral understanding of the Quran, Hadith, and rulings of Islamic jurists over the centuries since the life of the Prophet. Sharia is the divine law, whereas fiqh is our human understanding of that law. This concludes our introduction to the Sharia, and next time we'll discuss the philosophy of divine law as manifesting both divine mercy and rigor.